All right, what's up, beautiful people? Welcome back to DenofTruth. Today we got a very special guest, and I say that every episode, very special guest. But now today we got a conversation that I've been wanting to have for a long period of time, just crazy periods of time. So we've had to sort of rearrange it, but now we're here. That's the most important thing. So today we have Ollie. So Ollie, how are you?
Hello. Thanks for having me. It's quite an honor, man. I'm ready to go. I'm a little nervous.
Nervous. Man, you've been doing this for a while now, so you definitely know this podcasting, the world, and how it operates.
Yeah, no, it's good to be here. I'm, looking forward to seeing what we talk about. We were just talking off air about a whole bunch of podcasting and stuff like that, and then somebody in your team threw out the call. You got to start recording. We were talking too much rubbish already.
We're talking too much. Yeah. Well, look. Before we even get into the introductions, man, I think one thing that's really important now is to have conversations. If you're a podcaster, if you're a content director, I think it's really important to have conversations with people who have been doing it in a corporate setting, doing it in a private setting, and people who have been who actually know what they're talking about and actually know what they're doing. I think we're at that stage now where we're starting to see a lot of podcasts, and we're seeing a lot of people now start to document their types of truth, whether that be storytelling, whether that be factual types of podcasts, whether that be podcasts which are sort of documenting music or whatever it is. We're starting to see more. And I think now it's important just to come together as a community and champion each other. So look, Ollie, for people who don't know you, can you introduce yourself and what you do?
So I'm Ollie Wards. You can probably hear from my clipped vowels that I'm from New Zealand originally. And I am the content director at Triple J, national radio station in Australia, youth radio, part of the ABC, so public broadcaster, no ads, new and alternative music, but lots of ideas, issues, and everything that 18 to 24-year-old Australians care about. And apart from that, you've mentioned podcasts a few times. Last year I put out a podcast, the 4th season of the ABC's Unravel True Crime series. Mm-hmm. It's called Snowball. Mm-hmm. Weird story about my family and my brother. We had a run-in with an American con artist where my brother married an American lady, and she turned out to not really be who she said she was, and ultimately my family ended up losing all this stuff, my parents' home, and then I took the weird decision to go on a journey and track her down. And that's what the podcast I made is.
That's crazy. I'm saying that's crazy to even say that and to document it like you did. I think that when I was listening to it, one thing that really what I liked about it was the way that you documented it. So, for a lot of people don't know. So how did you document it? Talk about it. Talk to us a little bit about the process and how you sort of did, completed the podcast.
So I actually had a year. I made it over a year, and I had a year off from my job at Triple J. And initially, it started because I went home, and my dad actually was having a double heart bypass.
Yeah.
And so I went back to New Zealand, and, in those situations, you kind of start imagining what if the worst happens, and, wondered whether we would have my dad still. And then I started thinking about all the crazy things that you wish you had asked about that happen. And, every family has their stories. And that's one thing that I always thought about is everybody that either you just don't know them well enough to know what their story is, or you're like, oh yeah, that crazy thing that happened in that family. So we're not unique in that respect, but I went home and I was kind of thinking I actually wanted to know a little bit more about what happened, because when all of that stuff went down, I was living overseas initially. Yeah. And so I took a microphone home and just started asking questions about it. And the more I got into it, the more I'm like, wait, what? That's crazy.
Yeah.
And so I just recorded the story. I didn't really think much about what I would do with it. And then I had this year off where I went to with my partner. She was studying law that was half in Amsterdam, half in New York.
Okay, yeah.
So I was like, well, what am I going to do? And then so I started toying around with the story. And then the more I investigated it, the more I realized there was a crazy story there. So I literally just had a microphone with me. I had a setup kind of similar to what we've got going on here today. And I just started making phone calls, started investigating. pretended to be a private investigator for a while, started turning to, journalism.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I ended up going on a road trip with my oldest brother where we went to America, hired a muscle car, put some Hawaiian shirts on and pretended that we were, True Detective and literally followed the clues on a trail till we ended up finding her. Spoiler alert.
Yeah. So look, all that was a lot. That was a great summary, but let's break it down. So, okay. So where did most of this recording happen?
I did most of the research while I was in Amsterdam, a lot of recordings in New York. The road trip happened in California, and then for some reason I was in Costa Rica for about a month, and I did most of the recording there, where I would go into this kind of like shared workspace in this small town in Costa Rica, and have you heard the term digital nomad?
No, tell me about that. Break that down.
There's a big thing at the moment. Digital nomads are people who can do their job from anywhere. So, typically it's people who are like, I don't know, graphic designers or coders or people who work across the internet. And people have sussed out. It's like, why am I living in Sydney or Melbourne or, New York or wherever when I could go and live by the beach in Costa Rica and just work from there?
Yeah.
And so there's these kind of shared workspace places that have been set up. And I used to go into one of them and they had these telephone booths and I would take all the pillows off the couch. And I mean, you've got this acoustic studio. This is beautiful.
Yeah,
this
people can see.
Great.
Yeah.
What I mean?
Everything here is sort of insulated. If you close the door, everything, you can't hear anything. Yeah.
That's right. But I would have to go and make one. So I would take all these pillows off a couch and I would like build a little pillow fort in this telephone booth and I would go in there. And these coders and graphic designers and stuff would be sitting around in this shared workspace. And then I didn't really talk to them. I must have thought I was so weird because I'd get all these pillows and I'd go into this booth and then they would just hear me like going, Ollie Wards, Snowball, saying all this stuff all over and over. And so a lot of it was recorded there. And then I was traveling through South America and had my little backpack with my microphone and scoping out what you got here. Similar to this one. And I would make a little pillow fort in bedrooms, put a duvet over, get the acoustics going and record it on the road.
So that's crazy. So what made you do that? Because for a lot of people, to go overseas, record in all these different countries, having to do it by yourself, what was sort of the drive behind it? Because when I was listening to it, one thing that I enjoyed about it was that it was unique in the way that it was presented, in the sense that, it was a podcast that you developed, but
excuse me.
No, that's fine. It was a podcast that you developed, but it was more so about the story. It was more so about the storyline. To be honest, I was more interested in the storyline and where you were taking it rather than you actually as an individual. So what was that like? What really made you want to get that story out?
So I've always been interested in storytelling like you are, I suppose, and listening to podcasts for the craft of how to tell an audio story. And I think a big difference at the moment that sort of crystallizes this is the difference between a podcast and an audiobook. Okay. So, there's platforms like Audible. You can listen to Stephen Fry reading out Harry Potter, or you can probably find your favorite book in the library as an audio form where there's somebody reading that to you. But those are really difficult to listen to because written language is quite different to spoken language.
Yeah.
And that's why when you go to a wedding or a 21st or whatever, and somebody gets up and I'm always like, oh no, here we go. When somebody gets up to do a speech and they've got an A4 piece of paper, you know what I'm talking about? And then they're like head down and they start reading the speech.
And this is,
And it's really hard to follow and it sounds really clunky and, it's not a good listen. No. And that's because they've sat there and written it and then they're reading it out in basically a different language. So I wanted to test my own skills in being able to write for listening.
Yeah.
And do field recording. And I've been working in radio for, 13 years or something. You pick up all these skills and I wanted to combine them all into one particular piece of content. And that's the story. Some of it's recorded like this in a studio. Some of it's recorded on the road. Some of it's using like techniques you'd hear on a comedy breakfast radio show. A fake fake movie sketch,
Yeah,
movie trailer or whatever.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so I wanted to try and combine all the stuff that I've learned over the years into one story, and also just to tell a crazy story.
Yeah.
Like you said, each time you kind of, I was in it, and I was going, "Is this real? Like,
Yeah,
wait, what,
you
like,
can't make this shit up.
Yeah, I know, right?
Certain content, certain things you can't make up.
I know,
Yeah.
and there's some stuff there's some crazy stuff that happened that's not even in there, and so I guess it was just an opportunity for me to share a story that I thought would resonate with people, because there is my family at the heart of it, and it's a story about a pretty average family from New Zealand coming up against an extraordinary character from America, and there's a bit of a David and Goliath kind of like a small versus big kind of thing there. And the other thing is love fraud, falling in love with somebody that isn't who they say they are. People doing scams like con artist stuff is crazy common. I had no idea how much of that's going on. Yeah, like I've had so many people reach out to me since Snowball came out saying, thank you for telling this story, because, it really resonated, because, my dad or my mum or me or my cousin or whatever was married to somebody who turned out to be in it for the money, and then they ran off never to be seen again or whatever. Yeah. And that stuff's really common. It's crazy. And it's never spoken about because it's kind of underreported, because a lot of the time the victims of con artists, particularly in a love fraud setting, don't report it to the police, or they don't take any action because they're humiliated or they feel bad. Like, it sucks.
Yeah.
Imagine having your not only going through a breakup, but the breakup actually like took you down financially or whatever.
That's crazy.
And in retrospect, you're often like, oh, it's kind of obvious.
Yeah,
or you have people going, oh yeah, I knew she was up to no good or whatever. And it's like, well, why don't you say anything at the time?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So that's a very long answer to how I ended up starting on the journey, and it was fun to make though.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about your upbringing. I know you're talking about you coming from New Zealand. How was it like being raised in New Zealand?
New Zealand's a beautiful place. I always kind of get nervous about, like, when people talk about countries like it's a competition or a race or something. Oh, it's the best country. The best. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, there's some good, there's some bad. But it's undoubtedly a beautiful place. Great family, good friends. I miss it the older I get, but you see more beauty when you have been away from a place for a while and you go back. And we have this thing in New Zealand it's referenced in the podcast actually, called an OE, which is your overseas experience. And it's kind of like a rite of passage where every Kiwi, many Kiwis, and there's a certain privilege to the people who can do this, but like many Kiwis try to go and live overseas for some period, usually in their 20s. Yeah. To just kind of get a perspective from elsewhere, and then go home. It's just my OE has been going for like 13 years now or something. So, yeah.
And what were some of your early influences being raised in New Zealand?
Most Kiwis guys at my school would talk about the All Blacks and rugby and that kind of stuff, but I was always more interested in the comedy, storytellers. This guy called Billy T. James was one of the first big New Zealand comedians, Māori guy, really funny. And I just remember him being a big name that I kind of thought about more than I thought about the captain of the All Blacks or whatever. I used to listen to a lot of radio.
Yeah.
Probably
what type of radio stations? What type of radio?
There's a radio station over in New Zealand called Radio Hauraki.
Yeah.
Which is got a crazy backstory. If you want to go down a quick tangent.
Yeah, let's get down there. Let's get down there. This is the DenofTruth.
So you've heard of pirate radio?
Yeah, pirate radio, yep.
That comes from, and there was an old movie, or a movie came out a few years ago called The Boat That Rocked, which is sort of set on a radio station in the UK where they were literally on a boat, because they would be pirates, because they'd set up a radio station on a boat, and there would be they would sail out to sea and they would broadcast from there, because there was all these rules about what you could play on the radio or whatever.
Yeah.
Even the Beatles were banned. It's like, no, rock music's satanic or whatever. So this radio station in New Zealand, they built a radio station on a boat called the Tiri, and the government found out what they were doing, and there was this crazy moment where they tried to sail this radio station out on this boat, and there was one of those bridges, a viaduct bridge that closes like that.
Yeah. So it was coming down.
Yeah. And there was this massive crowd of young, like teenagers and stuff that were so excited to have a rock radio station that would play all the music that was banned that was going to be coming. And they were down at the harbour to see the boat off. And the boat was sailing out of the harbour, and it had to go underneath this viaduct bridge.
Yeah.
And the police were like, we can't let this happen. They'd been ordered by the government not to let this boat out. So they started closing the bridge, and the bridge was slowly coming together with the two parts of it, which was going to cut off this sail ship because of the mast wasn't going to be able to get out. And they were sailing the boat through, and the mast was going through the gap of the bridge. And one of the supporters stuck his head in the cogs that were turning the bridge. Yeah. So that if they kept closing the bridge, it was going to crush his head and kill him.
Yeah.
So they had to stop the bridge, and it left this little gap, and the boat was sailing through the middle, and the mast was going through the middle of the bridge, and it was going to get away, and everyone was like, yeah, go for it. And you can imagine all these people on the side of it, like, get out there. And then the police jumped off the bridge onto the boat and arrested everyone on the boat, and then it didn't work. And then they got out on bail, and then they snuck out at night, and they got out there. And for many years, this pirate radio station was broadcasting from, because there was a 12-mile limit of the country's territory, right?
Yeah.
And there's this tiny little triangle in the harbour that was 12 kilometres from every point. So it was actually a tiny little triangle of international waters.
Yeah.
So they sailed out there, and they just parked there and broadcast, and they were playing, I don't know, I guess it was like Steely Dan and Led Zeppelin and, whatever, and probably earlier than that, actually. And eventually, I told you this is a tangent.
Yeah. I got you, Dora. I know we were going back to Dora. I know we were getting back to you. Yeah.
And eventually they got a license. Oh, no, the boat got wrecked on the rocks at one point. They built another one. They got it out there. And then the night that they got a license to come back in and launch this radio station, they had a big party on the boat. And they were sailing back in, and the breakfast presenter had a big night. They were all drunk, and he fell overboard and drowned. Wow. And so the history of this radio station is amazing.
It's deep.
They called them the Morning Pirates, the guys who did the breakfast show, up until recently. And I listened to that a lot. So and it was like a classic rock station when I was listening. So I got really into classic rock, which is quite different to what we play on Triple J. So my early kind of influences was, your Pink Floyds, Guns N' Roses, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So that was a long answer for an influence of mine, I guess.
No, because that leads to my next. That leads sort of to my next question. So, being a young New Zealander growing up there, what made you come over to Australia, and what was the reason for you coming over here?
I actually moved to the UK first.
Okay.
So I was living in London. The first thing that made me leave New Zealand was I got stitched up for a job. I got overlooked for a job I was already doing. It was a whole thing. And I was like, man, this sucks. Why am I staying here? And I remember I called up this guy, a friend of mine, one day, and I was like, oh, what are you up to? And he was like, oh, I'm going to see Chloe off at the airport. I was like, oh, where's she going? And he's like, oh, she's actually going over to Ghana to teach. She's volunteering to teach kids how to read. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. Like I had no idea she was doing that, and I didn't even think that she was the kind of person who would do that kind of stuff. That's really great. And then it made me go, man, what am I doing?
Yeah.
And so the next day I went in and quit my job at this radio station in New Zealand, and I went off to Nepal and did some volunteering over there.
What'd you do over there?
I worked at this. There was an orphanage there that didn't have a road leading up to it. It was just a mud road, and then during the monsoon it would get really muddy, and they wouldn't be able to get vehicles up there. And a few of the kids who went there had disabilities, and so they really struggled with the road in the monsoon season. So me and this other dude built a concrete driveway
Okay.
for it. Anyway, and so after that, I moved to the UK, and it's easy for Kiwis to get a visa in the UK. That's why everyone goes there, and loved it there. But my girlfriend at the time, her visa ran out, and so we needed to come back towards home. And Sydney's, closer to home, but still a big city with the opportunities and interesting life. I guess wasn't quite ready to go home.
Yeah. So obviously having that fascination for radio and growing up in so many different types of radio channels with such deep history, how did you sort of transition towards working for Triple J? Was that something that you always wanted to do, or was that something that happened when you sort of came to Sydney and things just sort of evolved from there?
So when I was coming back, so I worked at a station in the UK I really liked called XFM, which at the time was kind of a indie rock sort of station. And when I knew I was moving back to Australia, I started sort of researching. I'd heard of Triple J because I, at uni in New Zealand, we had an Australian girl in our radio class who was like, Triple J in Australia, best radio station in the world. I really want to work there.
She was
and I remember thinking, oh, okay, right. And then, researched it when I was moving out to Australia. And then I was like, wow, it's super cool. And I was like, the one job I want is breakfast producer at Triple J. And just amazingly, I got that job a month after I arrived here. Yeah. And been there for 10 years now. So
why Triple J? I guess what kept you, or what keeps you at Triple J?
10 years later, you can it's like, what keeps you there? It's a long time, right?
Yeah,
Man, how long? What's the longest you've been in a single job?
A year and a half.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, a year, not even a year and a half, like a year. Like I'm quick. See, the thing about me is like with jobs, I get very bored very easily. Yeah. Like my professional background is I work in HR. Right. So for a lot of people who know me, know like I have two different types of worlds. You know what I'm saying? Like for example, if anyone in my workplace were to watch this, they'll be like, Tina, is this you? Yeah. Because imagine I'm the HR dude.
But you don't get the opportunity. But HR is all about talking and relating to people.
That's the only relationship. That's the only part of it that sort of relates to what I do. Yeah, because I get to actually speak to people. Yeah. But in terms of actually being a corporate type of person, I'm a completely different person to my other life. But yeah, so for me, it's always been like, I've only ever been at a place for about a year and a half to a year because it's completely different to like my lifestyle.
HR is tough as well because it's just hiring and firing, right? Like, sorting out conflicts. And stuff, so.
What's interesting about HR and like I notice especially is like people, they perceive you to be like this, like and I get it too. Like if I was to go into a company, I don't want to talk to the HR guy because I don't want to be fired or I don't want to be in that conversation. So I understand that.
So when Tino walks into the room, it's like, I'm being fired.
You get these eyes where it's like, oh shit. What's the HR guy? But it's like, I'm the coolest person. I feel like I'm the coolest person in the room. I'm the most laid back person. Yeah, right. But I guess it's just the role. But back to the 10 years.
So it's been an amazing decade, and it's a real honor to be part of it because I think there is a special place in the music industry and probably more broadly for Triple J in Australia, and there's a lot to be proud of working there in terms of, supporting up-and-coming artists. Seeing artists go from literally bedroom producers to being like, number one in America or like playing the main stage at a festival or whatever is pretty cool to be part of. Yeah. There's amazing people that work there and being able to learn from people. We were talking just before we started recording about, I just came from hanging out with some people who used to work there who are just like, creative beasts that can't help but make content and make interesting stuff all the time. Yeah. And so, it's really cool to be around people like that. And I think being a new music station as well and being, I guess, commentators and contributors to culture, it's always evolving and always changing. So, I was talking about radio station in New Zealand I used to listen to Hauraki before, who, when you're a classic rock station, how many times can you get excited to play Hotel California? Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
okay, here it is again.
Yeah.
Like, how does that keep you learning and experiencing new stuff? And that's not a problem at Triple J because, and I always say this to our presenters, I'm like, if you find it difficult to work out what to say when you're on air, think about the person who's at this radio station that's playing Back in Black for the 50th time that week. What are they going to say about that? Whereas you've got this exciting new artist who's from a regional part of Australia and has a like interesting story to tell and who's commentating on current socio-political issues. There's a whole lot to unpack here. Plus, it's just a good song that's new. That keeps it fresh, you know? And over 10 years, it's kind of like things have changed and there's always been new challenges, new platforms. You know, you've got in that 10 years, it's crazy to say, you know, you've had Instagram come along and, you know, now we've got TikTok and all these kinds of changes have happened, which means that it's not like working at a radio station. I always say it's working at a content production house that's across platforms, video, social, online, events. You know, it's a youth music and culture brand. It's not a radio station. So that's kept me on my toes for a decade now.
Yeah. I think Triple J plays an interesting role, especially when it comes to entertainment in Australia. I think definitely anyone who's listening to this has somehow been influenced by Triple J in some sort of way, whether that's the music that you listen to or whether that's a new artist that's just been played that now you're listening to or an artist that just went to a festival that you've been listening to.
Or debated how it used to be better. Or how I don't listen to it because they're a bunch of dickheads or whatever. You know, like I think that's probably true even for the people that don't engage with it. Hottest 100 comes around. We know that everybody debates like, oh, that song's shit. It shouldn't have been the hottest song of the year, or oh, I voted for it, or whatever. Like those conversations happen even with people who don't ever listen or engage with Triple J. To some extent, we also know that we're not like the word on everybody's lips. I mean, you know, it's kind of like, chill out, mate, you know. You know, like, it's not the biggest thing in the world.
And how do you manage it? That's interesting that you say that. How do you manage, like, you know, knowing that, for example, there's going to be a bunch of people that like Triple J, like the producers, but there's going to be a bunch of people also talking about, we don't really like the hottest 100 list. How do you manage that?
Well, I mean, like, you know, you got to know your audience and you can't be everything to everybody all the time as well. And that goes for any product, any media outlet, any news source or whatever. You know, there will be people who aren't there for it, but there's a lot of choice at the moment as well. And that, I guess to some extent that's fine. We want everybody to be part of it. We hope that every 18 to 24-year-old Australian, and you know, that's the only thing that we think about is 18 to 24-year-old Australians. And that's not to say people outside of that age group won't listen, but we hope that we can appeal to that age group and be of service and be of value to them. Doesn't mean every 18 to 24-year-old's going to listen, but you have to have your audience in mind, because otherwise if you start going, oh, but this person's saying that, you end up running around in circles, you know what I mean? Like, it's quite hard because we're a national station as well. There's not many stations in Australia that actually go across the whole country, and sometimes, like, you know, you have lots of different measures of success, but sometimes, like, the ratings will go down in Brisbane but up in Melbourne. And you're like, oh, what does that mean? Then you're like, oh, well, you know, we've got to think about Brisbane. But then you go and talk to Brisbane, but then Melbourne goes down. And, you know, what do you do? Excuse me. We've got the coronavirus.
Nah, we all got it now, then.
I'm going to spray this mic down.
Yeah.
I'm joking. We are socially distanced, though, anyway. So.
Yeah. Man, we all got it now, man.
Sorry.
But that sounds really interesting. I think especially what you're talking about in terms of Triple J being very community based. So you guys focus a lot about on community. You guys focus a lot on, for example, your audience. And then one thing that really happened that made me realize that, and I think what really made me start to pay attention to Triple J a lot more was when you changed the day of the hottest 100. So can you talk to me a little bit about that process and, you know, what you guys were thinking during that, and I guess what was the reason for you guys really making that push and making that change?
Yeah, so that was about 3 years ago now, I think, and that was a huge thing. It was a big process. I actually found myself testifying in front of a Senate committee looking into it last year, and I guess to go all the way back to it, the Hottest 100 had been on Australia Day for 20 plus years, and it was undoubtedly a big part of the day. And I think a lot of, particularly young Australians, would associate the Hottest 100 and Australia Day. And for many years that kind of worked, but the key thing is that from Triple J's point of view, the Hottest 100 isn't about Australia Day. It's actually a separate idea. It's about the best songs of the year as voted by our audience that happened to be playing down on the public holiday. And over the years, the debate and the perspectives of Indigenous Australians have been more recognised, I guess. And excuse me. We were aware of our place in that, and partly how the Hottest 100 was being brought into that debate as a symbol, rightly or wrongly, of Australia Day and stuff like that. And we didn't feel that was appropriate, and it was not what we are about. And of course, we want everybody to be able to feel included as well. Like I was saying before, 18 to 24-year-old Australians, that's our demographic. And everybody within that is welcome. Whether you're in the city or in the regions, or if you are a guy or a girl, or, gender non-binary, or if you're Indigenous or a person of colour or LGBTI or whatever. We want everybody to be able to feel included. And the day that the Hottest 100 was starting to be drawn into the debates around, which is a very valid debate and an important one, about the different perspectives of Australia Day. Mm-hmm. And I guess in short, it's a complicated thing, but in short, we felt that it was, I felt, and the conclusion of a year-long consultation process was that it would be the right thing to do to let that debate kind of happen without the Hottest 100 being a symbol within it. Yeah. And, to hold it on a different day would be a day that people could be included in it without having all of that other stuff. Yeah. So the process for it involved, I spent about a year looking into it. We didn't make we had thought about kind of what to do, but didn't want to make a knee-jerk decision, because these are complicated issues. And, when you're talking about the perspectives of communities and, I don't just mean Indigenous communities, I mean the music industry and our audience and artists and all of these kinds of things, we needed to somehow take those into account and measure them and make a considered decision. So we took a year to consult with all those groups, and we, did a big survey with our audience. I spent about a year talking to different artists, Indigenous cultural groups, even the Australia Day Council, taking in a wide range of perspectives to then be able to bring it back to our team, and as a team go, what is the right thing to do here? And ultimately we made that decision, which in retrospect seems like, it's a countdown of 100 songs. It's 100 bangers played in reverse order on a single day. What's the big deal? And it was a huge deal at the time. And I think 3 or 4 years on now, it's survived it, and people still bloody love the Hottest 100. And people still, like I was saying before, have barbecues and listen and debate whether the number one song should have been there, or, where are my votes coming into it? And, this used to be better because the music used to be better, or whatever. All of that stuff still happens. Yeah. Nothing broke. Yeah. And hopefully now more people can be included, and we've seen that. So, that's something that I was proud of how the process went. It was undoubtedly controversial, but I think now with a few years gone, it was the right thing to do. And I tell you what, next year people are going to be stoked that it's on the 4th Saturday of January, because, the public holiday moves around, and people forget that sometimes it's a Tuesday or a Wednesday or a Thursday, and it was sort of an island in the middle of the week, and we would have the countdown, and people, if people would be involved in it and party with it, it would be on that day. But now it's always going to be on a weekend day.
Yeah, so
and people don't have to field all the different things that come along with the debate about Australia Day while they listen to it. And I think that's a good thing for the music.
Yeah, I think a good thing about that is I think Triple J listened to their community and listened to what their community was trying to say, what their messages were, and sort of the things that was important for them. But that being said, on that token as well, what do you think your community is trying to tell you now?
There's a lot going on right now, and I think our community, being young, being passionate, being generally optimistic, I think even though 2020 and the issues that we are facing seem sometimes insurmountable, and sometimes, from climate change to the Black Lives Matter movement to the pandemic to the bushfires, sometimes it seems like there's an overall kind of, it leaves you kind of feeling like, wow, how do we solve these important, all of them are important issues, and but one thing about young people and young Australians is there is an optimism that we see through research and anecdotally that people want to be part of a better world, and people want to be part of the solution to these big issues. And I think we hear that from our community, that people are, and our audience, that they are looking for ways to be part of a positive change in the world for all of those big issues. And I think we want to reflect that back to them and be part of it as well. And it takes a lot of work to do it. We also have, we're a public organization where we have editorial policies that, we can't go out and be, taking political stances about what the government's policies are. We have to be fair and balanced, and we have to present, a diversity of perspectives so people can ultimately make up their own mind. But we need to do that on behalf of those young Australians that engage with Triple J. So I think, to put it simply, to the question, what's our community telling us now? It's that as an organisation that reflects young Australians, we need to be somehow reflecting that desire to be part of a positive impact on the world.
Mm-hmm. And I guess, to go off what you said, what do you think Triple J can do to have that positive impact? I know, like you said, it's going to take some time. These things aren't, 6 months or short-term sort of things. It's going to take some time. So, but what sort of things do you think Triple J are going to do or are currently doing that will sort of help get that positive change?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff. Like, I think, like every day it's about the, diversity of music that we play. And that doesn't just go for, we play about 60% Australian music. So, there's a lot of considerations there. It's a big country, and there's a lot of, even just different genres, arrangements, artists, and, Indigenous artists, artists of colour. There's a lot to curate to be able to represent a diversity of perspectives there. But there's also all the stuff that we do with kind of more information, talk-based content on air or what we put out online and videos and stuff like that. We've got a lot of work to do to be able to continually improve our representation of the diversity of Australia. It's, we're working hard on it, and we've always got more work to do, and that's internally and externally. And there's like that optimism I was talking about before that young people have, because most of our staff are young people. They all are passionate, intelligent, engaged people who aren't in it for the money. I can tell you that. They are in there every day busting their ass to try and do, I guess, the right thing. Yeah. And hopefully that comes out in some of the stuff that we do.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think it's really good that you talked about how, obviously Triple J, you guys have to have a balance of opinions. You can't just go out and say things on a whim. I think a lot of people don't understand that. I think a lot of people don't understand that, like, it is an organization, and there's you can't take a political stance on this, you can't take a political stance on that, but you do have to serve your community in a sense.
That's right.
Because you are the message carrier for your community. That's a big platform.
Well, and we're paid for by the community. We're a taxpayer-funded organisation, and people deserve to be able to have trust in the public broadcaster, the ABC. So Triple J is part of the ABC.
Yeah.
People don't chip in through their taxpayer dollars to not be able to get the appropriate level of journalism or diversity of perspectives and balance and stuff like that. So we're definitely part of that.
Yeah. So that being said, what was sort of your I guess best memory at Triple J, or still at Triple J?
Oh man,
I'm talking like you left.
Yeah.
What's been your best memory so far?
Well, it's 10 years. Like you do get to do cool stuff. I think one of the awesome things that we do is this thing called the One Night Stand, which is always a highlight. The One Night Stand is a free regional concert in an area that doesn't get much live music.
Yeah.
And so I've been able to go to places in Australia that I probably might not have otherwise ever gone, and go out there with some of Australia's best acts and put on this concert that has the best community feel of any event I've ever been to.
Yeah.
You imagine, like, we went to, because where did you grew up in Foster, was it? Or?
Yeah. So when my family first came to Australia, we moved to Newcastle. So I was in Newcastle for 2 years, and then we moved to Armidale. So it's a big part of my sort of pre-adolescence. So probably my primary school life was in Armidale. So I understand what you're saying when you're saying these regional places.
There's no bands coming to play at Armidale.
Like that. There's no bands coming to Armidale. Yeah. So imagine,
like we've haven't been to Armidale yet, but I've been to Dalby, Tumby Bay in South Australia. Went to Mount Isa in far northwest Queensland, Geraldton, WA, Mildura, Dubbo. Places that are regional towns that don't get much of the stuff. And so you can imagine what it's like for those towns when you get the big stage put up on their footy oval, and these, bands that are doing well internationally, or, winning the Hottest 100 or whatever, come into the town. And it's crazy. Yeah. The local bakeries doing like Triple J themed pies. You've got people coming from all over the state, all over the country for this thing. And so to get to go to those, I've been to a bunch of them. That's been a real highlight.
Yeah.
And I was actually, the one thing that I was thinking about the other day, there was this one particular moment that I was recounting to somebody the other day, and I realized that it really stuck with me. When the Arctic Monkeys played, they toured Australia on their AM record. So this must have been, I don't know, 2016, 2017 or something. No, 2015 maybe. Anyway, we received a letter from a mother whose son had been terminally ill, and he was in hospital, and he was a big Arctic Monkeys fan. And it was around the time that this record AM came out, and the poor guy, I'm not sure what he was ill with, but he went into a coma, and they were playing the album to him.
Wow.
And apparently it kind of, they saw sort of more signs of life when they played this record to him. And so it meant a lot to them. And then he passed away. And it was just before the Arctic Monkeys were playing in Sydney. Now, I forget where the family were from, but they wrote us this letter saying that they were going to be coming to Sydney with all of his family and friends, and they were going to be going to this show as kind of like, a tribute to him and a memory to him. And, if there's anything you can do, if you can pass this on to the band, we would just love to let them know about this. And I remember the kid's name was Malachi. And we managed to get the letter to the band, and, we're in the EMI building, and, thanks to their help, they told the band all about it. And I was at the concert, and I was up on the sort of side bleachers looking down, and I knew that the family and all the friends were down on the ground in the mosh pit area somewhere. And I was like, are they going to do anything? Are they not going to do anything? Bands, like, there's a lot of these kinds of messages come through, and you can't always do anything. But I was wondering what was going to happen. And I remember after they went off for the encore and they came back out and, everyone's screaming and the lights came back on and Alex Turner just goes, "This one's for Malachi." And then they started playing Are You Mine? And I remember I had shivers down the back of my spine and I looked down to the mosh pit and I thought, down there somewhere, there's a bunch of people that are his friends and his family that are just losing their shit right now and thinking about this guy that they lost from their lives. And that's the kind of moment that comes around every now and then when you get to work in a job like this, and that's something that's sort of stuck with me. So, shout out if you knew Malachi, shout out to you because I've never reconnected with anyone to do with that.
See, that's very impactful, man. I mean, a lot of people don't get that type of joy in their roles or in their jobs or what they do in the day to day. So you're really lucky. I mean, anyone who works in a job where they're able to do things that can impact people or do things that may shape a community, I think you're very fortunate. And sometimes it might not be things that you see. Sometimes your impact is your influence around people and what they do.
But I think these days, the term side hustle is a big thing. We did a survey last year which showed that the majority of young people have a side hustle. Like you were talking about you work in HR, but this is your side hustle, I guess, and this is your creative outlet. And I think you listening now, this is your project, Tino, and you kind of get to do that. And I think that's super cool because the way it works these days is that you might work in a role that's not your thing. Mm-hmm. You do it for the cash or whatever, but then you find your side hustle and you find your impact. And it's arguably never been easier to do that with the internet and podcasts and that kind of stuff. So good on you. Like you get to do it. You get to do it as well. Do you know what I mean? Everybody can do that kind of stuff.
I think it's so accessible right now. I think that people, a lot of the things. I was reading this article about how someone was saying that a lot of individuals wait for other companies or other creatives to sort of engage them for them to start to doing what they want to do. But most of the time now, you have access to people that can help you through your phone, through Instagram. Like as long as you're reaching out and you're trying to connect, you're connecting the dots to the people who can actually help you. Yeah. So I feel as if now more than ever, everything is sort of in reach. You might not have access to the people that may help execute your idea the best at the moment, but you definitely, if you keep going, you'll definitely find people who can help you execute that. Because I think the difference is, I think everyone can have a great idea, but it's really about executing that idea and putting some reality to it. And that process might take 1 year, might take 10 years.
And the graft that you have to put into that kind of stuff, we're here on a Saturday afternoon kind of thing, and you and your guys are, putting yourselves out there in your own time to do this kind of stuff. And that's actually how we connected. Is I came across your vodcast. Do we call it a vodcast? That's an old term, isn't it?
Yeah.
The video, what do we call that?
Yeah, you know what? I don't even know what to call this anymore. Like, I was calling it I prefer podcast. I don't like video interviewing because I feel like video interviewing is very specific. Yeah. And I feel like these days, I don't really think people really care about video interviewing. I think they prefer more long-term conversations. Because if you're just doing a video interviewing, you can 100% prepare for all the questions. So as a video interviewer, I know exactly the 10 questions and the 10 answers that I'm going to get. Right. But if I'm having a podcast, or if I have a podcast with someone, I know I'm going to have, let's just say, an hour. I got an hour to talk to someone, and we can actually have a dialogue, and then you can actually start to break down your ideas, your concepts, where you want to go. It's very personable, and I think now people don't like things that make them feel as if they're not on the same level. People want you to walk with them rather than walk above them. Yeah, it's kind of like
there's a weird antithesis here between our short-term engagement, Instagram video, it's 1 minute or 15-second story or whatever, like give it to me quick, TikTok, 15-second, boom, 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 like I just want to consume heaps. But then the other side of that is these longer form conversations where you want to be able to sit down and the beauty of audio and podcasts and stuff is you can go about your life, go for a jog, do some work, maybe be driving. You don't have to 100% commit to it, but you can lean into these longer form things. And so it's this really interesting kind of splitting of the media people consume. Yeah. Super bite-sized, quick stuff and the longer form things. Do you know what one of the most watched TV shows, I think, in the world is? But definitely in Europe. In Scandinavia, they call it slow TV.
What's that?
Where I think the most watched show ever in Norway was a ship coming into Oslo Harbour, and they just had cameras on the ship. And there's another. Oh no, there's another one where it's one of the Scandinavian countries. It might have been Sweden, I think, that had just a TV channel of just a fireplace burning, just a fire burning, and it's like huge numbers of people watching this stuff. There's another one, and they tried to do a version of it in Australia where it's just a train, just a camera on a train, and people just want to have these like long experiences that is just slow. Maybe it's relaxing. Maybe it's kind of actually trying to engage with something in a really meaningful way. It's kind of the antidote to that 15-second bite-sized social media, like give it to me now, more. Yeah. And your Joe Rogan podcasts and your Den of Truths and all of these things that are I've certainly gone down a few tangents and have been sprawling in this conversation, but it's something that you can
we're here.
But you can stick with it. Do you know what I mean? As opposed to like, if you were going to try and cut 15 seconds out of this clip to promote somewhere, what would it be? You probably can't capture the whole thing. Maybe it's this clip that I'm saying right now. But,
there we go. No, I'm totally with you. And for me, I think it has to do with preference. Like for me, I like to get into things deeper. I understand that, and maybe I'm a bit biased. So I understand that if I see a 1-minute clip on Instagram, I know definitely not to take it by face value, because the context of the minute after or the context of the minute before is going to be extremely important to the minute in the middle. Right. So I understand that aspect to it. But I think now, like you said, it's like people want to consume different types of content. Like you were talking about, I'll give you another example. Like my nephews and nieces, they watch these kids videos on their phone, and it's literally like a garbage truck. You know when a garbage truck comes to pick up the bins. And I was looking at the video, and the video had like 1 billion views. So I'm not
does the garbage truck drop the bin on somebody or something?
No, it's like the process. It's the process for like a garbage truck just driving, picking up the bin, putting the rubbish into the garbage truck, putting it back down. But kids love this, because kids love garbage trucks. They love those sort of things.
And
So now you just have a bunch of kids under the age of 5 just like watching this. And as a parent, these are just clicking. Yeah, like there's a lot of things like that, especially for kids, or for example, like Kinder Surprises. Just kids opening Kinder Surprises in the present. They'll get like 100 million views. So I think now we're in an interesting time where like content is so different now. People are creating different content.
Man, if we want some hits should we open a Kinder Surprise right now?
Yeah.
That will get some hits
I already thought about that. I was like, yo, this guy's getting hundreds. Maybe I should start doing that.
Wow.
Look, just to go back to sort of your role at Triple J. I think a lot of people who watch Triple J, and a lot of people watch this podcast, when I bring people in who are sort of in organizations, they really, I think, and from my feedback from people, they feel like, for example, yourself, you're very far away. You're very distant. As in, no one would, people can't have a conversation with you, which they probably could.
Yeah.
But they just feel as if, how would I ever email this guy or talk to this guy? So I think one thing that people, a question that someone asked me to ask during this interview was, how do you find talent? How do you especially with your radio presenters, people on the show, like how do you find talent in the right people in the right positions?
A multitude of ways. I'll give you 2 examples from the last week, I guess. One, somebody in my team forwarded me a video somebody had put out on Twitter, just to kind of like a little comedy video, and she was really funny and said, "You should check this. You should check this person out." So I watched it and I thought, she's young. She's seems interesting, seems funny, talented. So I just looked her up. She had her own website. She writes things, and she's a creative person who's like confident to put things out there, and she's like we talked about before, just doing something, just putting things out there. And I was like, that's great. Like, so I just reached out to her, and I'm going to give her a call next week and see if she would be interested in training, similar to you as well. Like we like I saw this and I thought, that's really cool that you're doing that, and you were speaking to I watched a few with people in the Western Sydney hip hop scene, and I was like, that's a cool area of expertise that we need. So then I reached out to you, and I'll see you after this. You know what I mean? Like,
we're here. Yeah.
But then there's sometimes I'll go to like a comedy show, or somebody will be a writer that reviews certain types of music that is a great writer, or I was at the Ozpod conference in Melbourne last year about my podcast, but I went to another panel discussion with somebody, and there was a young Marley Silva was her name on the panel, and she was just really inspiring, and she was a young person who I thought you've got something, you've got stuff to say, you are intelligent, you're able to articulate things. You should be a radio presenter. So I spoke to her afterwards, and and now she's on air on Triple J. And so I think there's it's not just me. I mean, like I mentioned before, you got to have a bit of a network of spies that can kind of send stuff to you. And we're always looking for new people. I mean, there's not always new roles. Mm-hmm. We've had a bit of a change in lineup this year, which has been a lot of new faces and new talent coming through, which is good. But yeah, I've just got to keep my eyes open and just try and spot young people that are creative and interesting and have something to say and might be representative of, like we were talking about before, the diversity of Australia and getting people from different backgrounds through as well. Yeah,
that's dope. And one thing also I want to talk to you about is prior to this, I was watching an interview that you did with Next Radio. And one thing that you kept saying was show your workings, and something you guys like to do with Triple J. So can you just break down a little bit what that means to you in terms of showing your, what does it mean when you say show your workings? What exactly were you
Yeah, interesting. To? I mean, you remember that from doing algebra or whatever at school, like at maths, they would be like, don't just write the answer down, you have to show the workings, because otherwise, how do I know you know? Often with maths, it would be, I actually don't care if you get the answer right or not. I just want to see how you got to the conclusion. So I've kind of extrapolated that out, and I do. It's true. I often say, show your workings in a kind of journalistic or information presenting sense. I think it's really important, especially this day and age, for when you're like covering a news story, for example, to actually say to the audience, this is why we are talking about this. This is why it's important. And by listening, reading, or watching this, this is what you're going to get out of it.
Yeah.
Rather than kind of starting off saying something like, I don't know, a new report has shown that 33% of young people are now unemployed and considering taking on going back to uni.
Yeah.
Let's say that's the story. You could tell it like I just said, but that's going to sound like a news bulletin. And that might be fine, whatever the format you're in. But maybe it would be better to be like, do you have a mate who doesn't have a job and they're thinking about going back to uni? Because there's so many people that have no work opportunities at the moment. Young people are having to find new ways to spend their time and upskill for a future job. So we want to break that down and find out why there aren't any jobs and whether it is worth going back to uni and if that'll help you in the future. That's what we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like that's literally saying, this is the story, this is why we want to investigate it, and this is what we're going to be talking about. So that's what I mean by showing your workings.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's, a lot of people, you've got a million options, you can flick off or you can go somewhere else, or you don't know why this is worth your time.
Yeah.
So have we showed our workings in this interview?
I think definitely, man. We showed a lot of workings. I think show your workings. Yeah. I think that's that's something that a lot of people don't do. I think I'm guilty as well. I think what's interesting, what's interesting about it is, and for people who don't have any context, is that even when I first started talking to you, one thing that you told me, which really resonated to me, was being able to actually get your concept, sit down on your concept, and actually have and being able to just explain your concept. You know what I mean? Show your workings in terms of how you can explain your concept. Why are you following this concept, and then why are you producing that type of content? And even if you break it down just like that, it really makes you start to think about what are you doing, and really makes you think about, if what you're doing makes sense.
Totally, and it's like, you know, other people would call that, you know, just know your pitch. What's the job that your thing does? And a good way to think about that is, I think, it might not necessarily just be you thinking clearly what your concept is. You want other people to be able to then go and tell people, oh, Den of Truth, yeah, that's about this. Yeah. Or, oh, Triple J's hack program, they talk about this kind of stuff. Because, you know, word of mouth, or even just people being clear, if you showed your workings and people understand what your concept is and why you do it, then they are able to take ownership of it themselves to some extent, and then be able to communicate that to other people.
Yeah.
If it's not clear and you haven't showed your workings, or you don't know what your concept or your pitch is, there's going to be all sorts of confusion. Yeah. And you, as the person who's making the show or the piece of content or whatever it is, you will be sporadic in your approach, and then the audience will be confused, and then you won't end up having like a clear kind of remit.
Concept. Concept. That's interesting. And that's something that I had to learn as well. It took me a long time to sort of realize that even some of the shit that I was producing, it was a bit sporadic. Yeah, but let's talk about the 100 million Joe Rogan bag, man. Because let's talk about that.
Was it 115 mil over 10 years or something?
Yeah, something like that. Over 100 M's.
So the Spotify deal, yeah. I mean, is that what you're shooting at?
That's what I'm shooting at. I'm definitely shooting. I'm shooting at that 100 really bad. Nah, but you know what? One thing that I have noticed is that I think for the podcast community in as a whole. Worldwide as a whole, I think that deal was really constructive, because now I think a lot of people have been making money from podcasts, and a lot of people have been having careers from podcasting for a long period of time. But with this deal, I think it really showed me that podcasting is serious, and it's really the form of communication in the future. And I think there's going to be more investments. There's going to be, I think, maybe not that, maybe because that's a different type of bag. But I think that there's definitely going to be more investments when it comes to podcasting. But and I want to let you talk about it, because I know you told me something, but I want you to explain it first, and then I want to jump in after that. Yeah,
I mean, look, I actually think there's not a lot of people that make money off. There's far more people who make podcasts and make no money than there are anybody who. It's kind of the 1% kind of thing. Yeah. You know what I mean? The whole podcast scene has always been one of those really democratic forms of media making. It's cheap to get into. Anybody can do it. Free to listen. So it's kind of a really democratic marketplace of content. Low barrier to entry, which means, you know, to be fair, there's a lot of shit podcasts out there because, you know, pandemic happens. Did you know on Amazon they sold out of podcast mics during lockdown? Because everybody's sitting at home going, oh, I've got good banter, I'll make a podcast, right? Yeah. And, you know, there's research, you know, there's like 1 million podcasts out there or whatever, but how many people are listening to podcasts? It's the like top small percent that anybody
actually listens to.
Like, you know, Joe Rogan, $115 million, obviously that's huge. But you're totally right about the investment of it, which is actually starting to conglomerate that democratic space of podcasts. So, you know, over in the States, Spotify bought a company called Gimlet. Gimlet was, you know, is a really great podcasting house in America. They've been doing it for a long time. Spotify bought them. You've got these other kind of like hedge fund backed giants like Luminary. And for a while, everybody was talking about, everybody wants to be the Netflix of something.
Yeah.
I want to be the, you know, they're the Netflix of blah, blah, blah. And they're like, what's the Netflix of podcasts? Yeah. So there's a few companies kind of vying for that. And Spotify have been like unashamedly obvious about what their strategy is. And I think the CEO the other day said something like, they're very clear that they want to be the number one platform worldwide for audio consumption. Yeah. Which is similar to kind of wanting to be the Netflix, like the Netflix of audio. Yeah. Not that Netflix is even, you know, they're the biggest, but not the only streaming service. So we've seen anybody can have a podcast, but then these companies that have huge amounts of money, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars to be able to buy companies like Gimlet and stuff like that, just slowly growing out and taking over the world. And so Spotify signing Joe Rogan was a real symbol in that movement where they've gone, okay, this guy's got the most popular podcast in the world. free to listen to on whatever stream podcast app you have, whether it's Apple Podcasts or Spotify or various other apps that you can have. But Spotify have bought it so that eventually they're going to go, or you can only listen to it on Spotify.
Yeah.
And then they're doing that with it. They've got this deal with Obama.
Yeah, when they got the streaming audio.
Doing his podcast and stuff like that. So you get these like massive names that are gradually being taken over by these huge companies in the race to be the platform that can put a fence around all of the content and go, if you want to listen, you gotta subscribe to Spotify.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to really be the big change that we're seeing in the podcasting space, where it's like the democratic outskirts of your mate who's bought a mic during the pandemic versus hugely backed companies that can buy the best talent that really get the numbers. And where it'll go from there, it's not really clear. But you're right, there's massive investment going into it. And I don't think anybody's necessarily cracked the model for how to actually make money out of podcasts, though.
100%. I totally agree with that. I've been seeing a lot of different, because I'm thinking about, I've been thinking about that. And I know you talked to me a little bit about it, but the thing about podcasts is very interesting because I know a lot of successful podcasters, they have something attached to that podcast. Like, for example, a lot of the podcasts that I watch, a lot of them are comedians. So they're comedians, so they're able to sort of package their comedy into a podcast, right, and then bring other people.
Or trial their comedy in the podcast and then take it to the stage.
Literally. Yeah. Or, you'd have certain musicians or retired musicians who are able to bring that fan base and bring that sort of that back-end music knowledge and then take it there, and then they're able to do certain shows.
That's right.
So I don't think anyone, like you said, has cracked a real way to monetize an actual podcast. Yeah, you can do ads. Yeah, definitely. I think, ads and, I guess sponsorship, those are monetary ways.
Yeah. But so there's kind of three areas I see there being monetization. You're right. There's like ads, which at best can be dynamically inserted. So you can have an old podcast with a new ad that's put in it. So, if you're going through it, if you're listening to, I don't know, Serial, for example, oldish American podcast, you might listen to it now, but if they can dynamically insert an ad in your area for a new product.
Okay, yeah.
So that's one way of doing it. The other way is, like you said, sponsorships, where you do, like in the Joe Rogan example, get him just saying a whole bunch of stuff at the start about this surfboard that I've bought is like the best or whatever, and that's, you get paid for that. Yeah. But people just skip that.
Yeah, listen,
you know what I mean? The conversation you want starts 5 minutes into it, so you skip that or whatever. So that's a problem there. The third way, which is a really weird, and this is very rarely done well, is when companies actually start a podcast as a piece of kind of advertorial content in its own right. So, for example, I know a guy who started this one. I think it was on behalf of Jeep.
Yeah.
And they were like, we're a rugged vehicle, and you can go out on adventures with Jeep. And so these companies go, everyone's into podcasting. We need to have a podcast. It's like you said, it's the future of media. What are we doing in this space? And so they go, okay, let's create a podcast about going on adventures. And it's just sort of subtly a Jeep podcast.
Yeah, pretty much.
It might have the logo on it, or it might even say up front, brought to you by Jeep or whatever. So there's kind of like, is the entire content driven by a commercial reason, or is it content that has a commercial advertorial thing slapped onto it somehow?
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be interesting.
What's this? Are we an ad for Jeep right now?
Yeah. I think, see, personally, I don't really like that. I think that, well, look, I guess it really depends on what type of podcast you want to have. I think that's definitely fine. But for me, it's just, I definitely think control over content is the value podcasts bring. I think a lot of the things that people talk to on podcasts, you can't have them on any sort of mainstream channels. And that's why people enjoy them so much, because it's unfiltered and you don't have any restrictions, or you don't have any borders of what you can talk about.
Yeah.
We can have a conversation like this, and just get on a tandem but bring it back. But these tandems are things that people can relate to. So I think the control of the content is very important. So that's why, when I see those and it's not all, but a lot of podcasts which are company driven, that you're not going to get that type of value from that podcast.
No,
because it's very controlled. It's sort of like a TV show where you know that, or a commercial where okay, I'm going to go to that podcast and it's going to be a commercial for whatever that product is. It's not necessarily a podcast for over conversation. I think an example of where I think they've done that really well is in the UK. Spotify in the UK team, they have a podcast, like a music podcast. Even though it is Spotify, so there is a bit of bias there. It's very open. It's open based, so it's open. It's an open podcast based on music, which is happening in that community, in that culture. Even though it is Spotify.
Which one is it in the UK?
It's in the UK. You can find it if you go on the UK Spotify page.
Right.
You can find all the different links for the podcasts that they do there. But I think they do a good job in doing that, because that podcast adds value to that company, and it's not. I guess it's not forced in the way that they're trying to put out the content like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and one day maybe somebody will come to you, if not already, and say, "Hey, love what you do. We don't want to interfere with what you say, but can we just chuck 30 seconds in the middle and run our ad for this new coffee brand?"
Yeah.
Would
Yeah, see, that'll be fine. You know what I mean? As long as you're not trying to control the content.
Yeah,
because I feel like that's where the value is. It's the content.
Yeah.
It's the unfiltered, unbordered content.
And you got it. That's the thing about Triple J that I think people resonate with, because they know we're independent. We don't have any advertising, so they know that we're not being paid to say some shit about this thing, or not say it as well.
Yeah,
that's the other thing that can happen is if a famous fast food chain was the sponsor of this podcast, what would they then think if your guest, so me, comes on here and then goes, "Oh, the burglar boo at this fast food chain, yeah, it's gross. I don't like it. In fact, I heard that it's actually really bad for you." Is the chain going to let you put the podcast out? No,
that's the issue. Yeah. So yeah, I think that control of content is key.
Notice how I kind of I was going into ABC mode where I was trying to avoid actually saying any particular brands there as well. So.
Yeah, I saw that. Don't worry, I caught that. But another thing I want to talk to you about is what people's interest in crime podcasts, crime shows, right? Because for me personally, when I watch crime podcasts or crime shows, I understand why people like it, because they want to understand the mental aspect of it. But for me, it's too much. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to know how someone commits a crime.
Especially when a lot of them are like quite gory, blood and guts kind of grisly murders and stuff like that.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I was quite happy to make a true crime podcast that has no dead bodies.
Yeah.
No blood, no guts. So I think that was, I had a lot of messages, and I knew that it would come at a time that would be quite refreshing to have a true crime genre that wasn't focused on murder. Because, let's be real, the true crime genre is generally about murder, and it's generally about some poor woman that's been tragically murdered by some guy.
Yeah, 90% of the time. Yeah, that's fucking true. Yeah.
And or is missing. That's the other thing is, missing, presumed murdered is a big kind of trope, I guess. And it sucks to listen to that on your spare time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think it appeals to people because people like to imagine what they would do in the worst or most extreme situations that can happen to humans.
Yeah.
In the same way that Bear Grylls is appealing, because you go, what would I do if I got dropped off in a swamp in the middle of nowhere? Would I be able to eat that bug?
Yeah, that's true.
True crime, I think on a different tip, but same sort of mentality is like, oh man, what would I do if I was being chased by somebody in a dark alleyway or whatever. And people like to have insights into, I think, anything that's true. For me, I don't read fiction books for this reason. Like, I don't read novels. I only ever read true stories, because you buzz out when something crazy happens, and it happened, and you can go, whoa, like hopefully that's what people like. Listen to Snowball, they'll go like, oh wow, that's something that really happened. That's crazy, or that's why I'm interested in history, because who needs, like, truth is stranger than fiction, and in the same way that a war story is interesting because it's against the odds, or like it's madness that somebody survived this incident or whatever. True crime is appealing to people because you have empathy for the people involved, and you wonder what you would do in that situation. And it's also because it's the extreme part of humanity that seems like it's out of possibilities, but then when you listen or you watch or whatever, you get to remind yourself that, whoa, that shit happens.
Yeah. It's crazy. So, Ollie, what's inspiring you right now? What's motivating you?
Having a chat with you, man, like talking about this kind of stuff, it's actually sort of interesting to actually take a step back and talk about this kind of bigger picture thing. Because sometimes I get stuck in the weeds of detail and like, what about this project, or, how did that thing go and not so well, and think about making it better or whatever. So it's always refreshing to come and speak with, people like yourself and just hear from you as well about what, how you come at things. So, thank you for having me on. I've been inspired to hear your approach to things and your thoughts.
Yeah. I think that's interesting. I think we're all inspired right now, man. I think that there's a really good energy in Sydney right now. I think that I think people have stopped waiting for something to happen, if that makes sense. Stop waiting for someone to do this, stop waiting for someone to do that, and just do it. Yeah. And just when you do it, sometimes things work, sometimes things doesn't. But majority of the time, especially now, what we're seeing, a lot of things are starting to work, and it's really helping the culture. So
I mean, how long have you been in Sydney for?
I've been in Sydney since I was 11.
So you remember, and how old are you now?
I am 24.
Right. So, but if you're only, like, you would have been, of drinking age after the lockouts.
Yeah. So
you wouldn't remember Sydney before the lockouts.
I turned 18, and before the lockouts, it was probably about 3 months. So I went out for 3 months.
Yeah, right.
So I had a little bit of that taste. Yeah.
I mean, I was only here for a little bit before those as well, and it used to be awesome. It was mad, and it's a shame that whole thing happened. We're just down the, we're sitting here probably 500 meters from King's Cross.
Crazy.
And it used to be, I mean, it wasn't really my type of vibe, but at least there was an area that you could go where you knew there was always something happening. It was open late.
Yeah.
You could see a show if you wanted or whatever. And to have all that lost in this city was such a disappointment. And for people of your age, I'm a bit older, but like where you didn't get to grow up with that, you miss out on all of that kind of opportunity. And it might not be your thing, but at least to even have the opportunity to have that nightlife has been something that's been really sad to think about young people growing up in this city and other places in New South Wales, at least, that have missed out on that. And I hope what you're talking about with the vibe in the city starting to increase, I hope, that comes back with it.
Yeah. Someone was telling me that. It was fucked up because, I just came back from New York. I just came back from LA. And, I was describing to people, I said, what's interesting about when you go to cities or countries overseas is that their culture isn't necessarily better than yours. But what they have is they actually have a culture where the people in their community support their culture. People in their community support their radio channels. People in their community support their podcasts, their nightclubs, whatever their spots are. People are supporting it. And to translate it over to Australia, it's just like you said, I think growing up, so let's say the lockouts came out when I was just, let's just say 19, I think. 18, 19. So it's like up until maybe last year, we couldn't get into a club after 1 a.m. Like for me, that's crazy.
Yeah,
what I mean? That is crazy.
Yeah.
Definitely understanding the reasons behind that, but and it's not too late, but you definitely sucked out the culture for like a year period, or for a certain demographic of year.
Yeah, totally. And you had people kind of making the policies, and I remember two things when they came in. One was the politicians were saying nothing good happens after midnight. That was one of their lines, and it's like, yeah, for you're you're 55 and boring.
Yeah,
like many people have met their life partners on the dance floor at 3 a.m. or whatever.
Yeah, this is a fact. Yeah.
I remember somebody in the Keep Sydney Open rallies holding up a sign saying, it was a little kid holding up a sign saying mum and dad met on the dance floor at 2 a.m. or something like that. And the other thing was we had, I can't remember who she was exactly, but she was from the New South Wales government, and she was on Triple J's hack program talking about the lockouts.
Yeah. And
explaining the whole thing where it was like, you can get certain types of drinks up until a certain time, and I distinctly remember her saying, I think it was after 10 p.m. because you couldn't buy alcohol. I don't know if you can now, but you can't buy alcohol after 10 p.m. But she was like, you can go. The presenter was like, well, what are people supposed to do? Like if they're out, do they just go home? And she was like, oh, you can go and have a flutter on the pokies. It's a direct quote. Oh, they could, you can have a flutter on the pokies. And it's like, oh, cool. So it's okay to gamble.
Yeah.
But I can't be seeing a DJ or something like that.
Yeah.
And it was just so lame.
Yeah, that's
just
the
way
word.
to describe it.
It's just
It's so lame.
Yeah. I like how you summed that up. It's just so lame, man. And I think now we're just trying to pick up the pieces. It's like, if a building falls down and someone's coming out that building and it's like, you got your mate on one arm, your other mate on the other arm, and you guys are like, all right, we're getting out of here. That's the stage we're at now.
Yeah.
So now we're just trying to clean everything up, start building that infrastructure again.
Yeah, and you've had a lot of people on the show that are busting their ass to do that. Promoters, people that are working with artists.
Yeah.
People work hard in this area, and it's like I was saying about our staff before. It's like not to make money. It's because they believe in the culture, or they believe in, creative output and relating to the community and that kind of stuff. So, I'm always amazed to see the people who basically spend their life's work in the arts and performing arts and music sector and stuff, busting their ass to make it happen, because no one's going to do it otherwise.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Ollie, well, look, where can people find you? Where can you plug your ads, your social medias?
I'm just at Ollie Wards on Twitter and Instagram, I guess. So at OLLIEWARDS. Stoked if you're still listening to my ramblings here, but it's been really fun, man. I appreciate it.
I appreciate your time. Thanks, Ollie.